Welcome to the Asshole Book Club. I've taken like an 8-day... Holy shit. I just started and I can't talk. I took an 8-day break. For no real reason. I just wanted to think about my channel for a bit and relax, because I feel like I've been trying to push myself to fast track YouTube success. And I don't know, I realized that it's going to take me probably years of doing this until my channel actually grows. So instead of trying to chase the views or whatever the fuck and, solely doing Reddit shit because that's where all of my views are coming from, I'm just going to start doing whatever I want to do and filming videos when I feel like filming them, which is what I should have been doing from the start, but So, yeah. Even if my videos are only getting a few views per thing, I'm still gonna do what I'm gonna be doing. And, I don't know, honestly, I'm getting bored of the Reddit shit that I've been looking at. Like, everything on Am I the Asshole is kind of blending together. It's basically the same. Just petty people's drama who don't know how to actually talk to each other and resolve their issues by themselves. Or trying to make up issues just so they can get some freaking, attention on Reddit, which to me just seems pathetic. Yeah. So I'm going to be moving on to reading other things, and I've decided to start with Catwoman Soul Stealer by Sarah j.Maas, M-A-A-S. It's part of the DC Icons series, which features 4 books, all of them by different authors. There's Wonder Woman Warbringer, Batman Nightwalker, the Catwoman one, and then Superman Dawnbreaker. I haven't read the other 3. I got this one at the dollar store for $1. And the other ones were there when I first saw it, but I only decided to buy one, and now they're not there anymore. So, whoops. And I'm going to be doing videos on this until I have finished the entire book. So, is there a table of contents? No. There are how many chapters? There are 38 chapters in this book. So that's probably going to be a video a chapter. So yeah, the next 38 videos are probably going to be reading and reviewing Catwoman chapters. So please stick around. Think of it as an audiobook. I don't know. And yeah, let's begin with Before Chapter 1. The roaring crowd in the makeshift arena didn't set her blood on fire. It did not shake her or rile her or set her hopping from foot to foot. No. Selena Kyle only rolled her shoulders. Once. Twice. And waited. The wild cheering that barreled down the grimy hallway to the prep room was little more than a distant rumble of thunder. A storm. Just like the one that had swept over the East End on her walk from the apartment complex. She'd been soaked before she reached the covert subway entrance that led into the underground gaming warren, owned by Carmine Falcone, the latest of Gotham City's endless parade of mob bosses. But unlike any other storm, this fight too... But like any other storm, this fight too would be weathered. Rain still drying in her long, dark hair, Selena checked that it was indeed tucked into its tight bun atop her head. She'd made the mistake once of wearing a ponytail in her second street fight. The other girl had managed to grab it, and those few seconds when Selena's neck had been exposed had lasted longer than any in her life. But she'd won, barely, and she'd learned. Had learned that at every fight since, whether on the streets above or in the arena carved into the sewers beneath Gotham City. It didn't matter who her opponent was tonight. The challengers were all usually variations of the same. Desperate men who owed more money than they could repay to Carmine Falcone. Fools willing to risk their lives for a chance to lift their debt by taking on one of his leopards in the ring. The prize? Never having to look over their shoulder for a waiting shadow. The cost of failing? Having their asses handed to them, and the debts remained. Usually with the promise of a one-way ticket to the bottom of the Sprang River. The odds of winning? Slim to none. Regardless of whatever sad sack she'd be battling tonight, Selena prayed Falcone would give her the nod faster than last time. That fight, he'd made her keep that particularly brutal match going. The crowd had been too excited, too ready to spend money on the cheap alcohol and everything else for sale in the subterranean warren. She'd taken home more bruises than usual, and the man she'd beaten to unconsciousness? Not her problem, she told herself again and again. Even when she saw her adversaries' bloodied faces in her dreams, both asleep and waking. What Falcone did to them after the fight was not her problem. She left her opponents breathing. At least she had that. And at least she wasn't dumb enough to push back outright like some of the other leopards. The ones who were too proud or too stupid or too young to know how the game was played. No. Her own small rebellions against Carmine Falcone were subtler. He wanted men dead, she left them unconscious. But did it so well that not one person in the crowd objected. A fine line to walk, especially with her sister's life hanging in the balance. Push back too much and Falcone might ask questions. Start wondering who meant the most to her, where to strike hardest. She'd never allow it to get to that point, never risk Maggie's safety like that. Even if these fights were all for her, every one of them. It had been 3 years since Selena had joined the Leopards, and nearly 2.5 since. She'd proved herself against the other girl gangs well enough that Mika, her alpha, had introduced her to Falcone. Selena hadn't dared miss that meeting. Order in the girl gangs was simple. The alpha of each gang ruled and protected, laid down punishment and reward. The alpha's commands were law. And the enforcers of those commands were their seconds and thirds. From there, the pecking order turned murkier. Fighting offered a way to rise in the ranks, or you could fall, depending on how badly a match went. Even an alpha might be challenged if you were dumb or brave enough to do so. But the thought of ascending the ranks had been far from Selena's mind when Mika brought Falcone over to watch her take on the second of the wolf pack and leave the girl leaking blood onto the concrete of the alley. Before that fight, only 4 leopard spots had been inked onto Selena's pale left arm, each a trophy of a fight won. Selena adjusted the hem of her white tank. At 17, she now had 27 spots inked across both arms, undefeated. That's what the match MC was declaring down the hall. Selena could just make out the croon of words. The undefeated champion, the fiercest of leopards. Her hand drifted to the one item she was allowed to bring into the arena, the bullwhip. Some leopards opted for signature makeup or clothes to make their identity stand out in the ring. Selena had little money to spare for that kind of thing. Not when a tube of lip gloss could cost as much as a small meal. But Mika had been unimpressed when Selena had shown up to her first official fight in her old gymnastics leotard and a pair of leggings. You look like you're going to jazzercise, her alpha had said. Let's give you some claws at least. All sorts of small weapons were allowed in the ring, short of knives and guns. But there hadn't been any on hand that night. No, there had only been the bullwhip, discarded in a pile of props from when this place hosted some sort of alternative circus. You've got 10 minutes to figure out how to use it, Mika had warned Selena before leaving. She barely figured out how to snap the thing before she was shoved into the fighting ring. The whip had been more of a hindrance than a help in that first fight, but the crowd had loved it. And some smart of her loved it, the crack that cleaved through the world. So she'd learned to wield it, until it became an extension of her arm, until it gave her an edge that her slight frame didn't offer. The high drama it provided in the ring didn't hurt either. A thump on the metal door was her signal to go. Selena checked the bullwhip at her hip, her black spandex pants, the green sneakers that matched her eyes, though no one had ever commented on it. She flexed her fingers within their wrappings. All good. Or as good as it could be. Her muscles were loose, her body limber, courtesy of her old gymnastics warm-up, which she'd repurposed for these fights. Between the physical fighting, the whip, and the sheer acrobatics that she used both for show and to throw her heavier opponents off balance, making sure her body was ready for these fights was half the battle. The rusty door groaned as Selena opened it. Mika was tending to the new girl in the hall beyond, the flickering fluorescent lights draining the alpha's golden skin of its usual glow. Mika threw Selena an assessing look over her narrow shoulder, her black braids shifting with the movement. The white girl sniffling in front of her gingerly wiped away the blood streaming from her swollen nose. One of the kitten's eyes was already puffy and red, and the other swimming with unshed tears. No wonder the crowd was riled. If a leopard had taken that bad a beating, it must have been one hell of a fight. Brutal enough that Mika put a hand on the girl's pale arm to keep her from swaying. Down the shadowy hall that led to the arena, one of Falcone's bouncers beckoned. Selena shut the door behind her. She'd left no valuables. She had nothing worth stealing anyway. Be careful, Mika said, as Selena passed, the Asian girl's voice low and soft. He's got a worse batch than usual tonight. The kitten hissed, yanking her way away as Mika dabbed her split lip with a disinfectant wipe. Mika snarled a warning at her, and the kitten wisely fell still, trembling a bit as the alpha cleaned out the cut. Mika added, without glancing back, he saved the best for you. Sorry. He always does, Selena said coolly. Even as her stomach rolled, I can handle it. She didn't have any other choice. Losing would leave Maggie with no one to look after her, and refusing to fight, not an option either. In the 3 years that Selena had known Mika, the Alpha had never suggested ending their arrangement with Carmine Falcone, not when having Falcone back the Leopards made the other East End gangs think twice about pushing in on their territory. Even if it meant doing these fights and offering up Leopards for the crowd's enjoyment. Falcone turned it into a weekly spectacle, a veritable Roman circus to make the underbelly of Gotham City love and fear him. It certainly helped that many of the other notorious lowlives had been imprisoned thanks to certain do-gooders running around the city in capes. Mika eased the kitten to the prep room, giving Selena a jerk of the chin in order to go. Selena paused to scan the hall, the exits. Even down here in the heart of Falcone's territory, it was a death wish to be defenseless in the open, especially if you were an alpha with as many enemies as Mika. 3 figures slipped in from a door at the opposite end of the hall, and Selena's shoulders loosened a bit at the sight of the Latina girl who emerged, Annie, Mika's second, and the other two low-ranking leopards flanking her. Good. They'd guard the exit while their alpha tended to their own. The crowd's cheering rumbled through the concrete floor, rattling the loose ceramic tiles on the walls, echoing along Selena's bones and breath as she neared the dented metal door to the arena. The bouncer gestured for her to hurry the hell up, but she kept her strides even, stalking. The leopards, these fights, they were her job, and it paid well. With her mother gone and her sister sick, no legit job could pay as much or as quickly. The leopards had asked no questions 3 years ago. They hadn't wondered if she'd deliberately picked that fight with the Razor Girl in the block courtyard. And another until Mika came sniffing about the hothead in Building C. Mika only told her that pulling this sort of shit in East End would get her killed pretty fast. And that the leopards could use a fighter like her. The alpha didn't ask who taught her to fight or how to take a punch. The bouncer opened the door, the unfiltered roar of the crowd bursting down the hallway like a pack of rabid wolves. Selena blew out a long breath as she lifted her chin and stepped into the sound and the light and the wrath. Let the bloodying begin. Her hands were so swollen that she could barely handle her keys. Their jangling filled her apartment complex hallway, loud as a goddamn dinner bell. It took every lingering scrap of concentration to keep her hands steady enough to slide the key into the top lock. Selena refused to look at the three others beneath it, each as imposing as a mountain peak. Too long. Falcone had dragged out the fight for too long. Mika hadn't been lying about her opponent. The man, a fighter himself, not well trained but big, twice her weight, and desperate to repay his debt. His blows had hurt, to say the least, but she'd won, not by brute strength, but because she'd been smarter. When the injuries had started to pile up, when he'd managed to snatch the whip from her hand, when she'd temporarily lost sight in one eye thanks to the blood, she'd used simple physics against him. Her science teacher would be proud. If she showed up to class tomorrow, or next week. The top lock snapped open. Against larger, heavier opponents, pure physical strength wasn't her greatest ally. No, her own arsenal was something different. Speed, agility, flexibility, mostly thanks to those countless gymnastics classes. And the bullwhip. All things that she might use to surprise her opponent, to harness the speed of a 200-pound man charging at her and wield it against him. A few maneuvers, and that blind rush at her would turn into a flip onto his back, or a face-first collision with one of the posts, or the bullwhip around his leg, yanking his balance out from under him as she drove her elbow into his gut. Always aim for the soft parts. She'd learned that before she'd ever set foot in the ring. Her left eye still blurry, Selena surveyed either side of the grayish-blue painted hallway, skimming over the graffiti, the puddle of something that wasn't water, none of it threatening. The shadowy parts of the hall, precisely why there were 4 locks on this door, why Maggie was to open it under 0 circumstances, especially for their mother, and whoever her mother might have with her. There was still a dent in the metal door from the last time, 6 months ago. A large, round dent right beside the peephole, where the sweaty man who'd stood beside her strung-out mother had planted his fist when Selena refused to answer the door. They'd only left when a neighbor had threatened to call the cops. There were nice people in this building, good people, but calling the cops would have made things worse. Cops meant questions. Questions about their living situation. Selena turned back to the door, assured that no one had slipped into those shadows. In the shape she was in, she managed to open the second lock and the third. Selena was just starting on the final lock when the elevator grumbled down the hall. The dented doors parted to reveal Mrs. Sullivan, grocery bags in one hand, keys threaded like metal claws through the fingers of her other. Their eyes met as the ancient white woman hobbled down the hall, and Selena gave her a nod. Praying the hood of the sweatshirt beneath her jacket concealed her face. The bullwhip, at least, was hidden down her back. Mrs. Sullivan frowned deeply, clicking her tongue, and hurried for her apartment. The woman had 5 locks. Selena took her time with the final lock, well aware the woman was monitoring her every movement. She debated telling Mrs. Sullivan that she wasn't lingering because she was thinking of robbing her. Debated it and decided against it at the sneer the old woman threw her way. Trash, that was the word that danced in Mrs. Sullivan's eyes before she slammed shut the door to her apartment, and all those locks clicked into place. Selena was too sore to bother being pissed off by it. She'd heard worse. She freed the last lock and entered the apartment, quickly shutting and locking the door. Lock after lock after lock. The chain at the very top. The apartment was dim, illuminated only by the golden glow of the streetlights in the courtyard outside the 2 windows of their living room/kitchen. She was pretty sure there were people in Gotham City whose bathrooms were bigger than the entirety of this space, but at least she kept it as clean as she could. The tang of tomato sauce and the sweetness of bread lingered in the air. A peek in the fridge revealed that Maggie had indeed eaten the food Selena had bought for her after school. A lot of it. Good. Shutting the fridge, Selena opened the freezer and fished out a bag of peas stashed behind a stack of frozen dinners. She pushed it against her throbbing cheek as she counted those frozen dinners. Just 3. Their meals for the rest of the week once the Italian ran out. Pressing the frozen peas to her face, savoring the cool bite, Selena stashed the bullwhip under the sink, towed off her sneakers, and padded over to the dingy green carpet of the living area to the hallway with the bathroom and single bedroom across from it. The tiny bathroom was dark, empty, but to her left a warm glow leaked from the door left ajar. The wad of cash in her back pocket was still not enough. Not between rent and food and Maggie's tests and co-pays. Her chest tight, she eased open the door with a shoulder, craning her head inside the bedroom. It was the only place of color in the apartment, painted buttercup yellow and plastered with Broadway posters Selena had been lucky enough to find when yet another East End school had been shut down and cleared out its theater department. Those posters now watched over the girl in the bed, curled up under some cartoon kid's comforter that was about 2 sizes too small. 10 years too worn. So was everything in the room, including the glowworm nightlight Maggie still insisted be left on. Selena didn't blame her. At 13, Maggie had dealt with enough shit to earn the right to do whatever she wanted. The labored, rasping breathing that filled the room was proof enough. Selena silently picked up one of the several inhalers besides Maggie's bed and checked the gauge. More than enough left if another coughing fit hit her tonight. Not that Selena wouldn't rush in here from her spot in the living room couch. the moment she heard her sister's hacking coughs. After plugging in the humidifier, Selena crept back to the living space and slumped into a cracked vinyl chair at the small table in the middle of the kitchen. Everything ached. Everything throbbed and burned and begged her to lie down. Selena checked the clock. 2 a.m. They had school in 5 hours. Well, Maggie had school. Selena certainly couldn't go with her face like this. She fished the cash from her back pocket and set it on the plastic table. Hauling a small box in the center of the table towards her, Selena looted through it with the hand that hurt only a fraction less than the other. She'd have to be smart at the market. The EBT funds only stretched so far, certainly not far enough to cover herself and a sister with severe cystic fibrosis. Selena had read up on food as medicine on a library computer while waiting for Maggie to finish her after-school theater class. Not a cure-all, but eating healthy could help. Anything was worth a try. If it bought them time. If it brought Maggie any relief. Cystic fibrosis. Selena couldn't remember a time when she hadn't known those words. What they meant. The incurable genetic disease that caused a buildup of mucus in several organs, but especially the lungs. The mucus clogged and blocked airways where it trapped bacteria that at best led to infections, at worst lung damage and respiratory failure. And then there was the mucus that also built up in the pancreas, blocking the enzymes that helped break down food and absorb nutrients. Selena had Googled it once. Life expectancy for severe cystic fibrosis. She'd closed the web browser and vomited into the library's toilet for 30 minutes afterwards. Selena studied the cash on the table and swallowed. The kinds of healthy foods Maggie needed didn't come cheap. The frozen microwave dinners were emergency meals, garbage food. The fresh Italian meal Maggie had consumed tonight was a rare treat. And perhaps an apology for the fight Selena had left her sister in order to take part in. Your face. The rasping words had Selena's head snapping up. You should be asleep. Maggie's curly brown hair was half wild, a pillow wrinkle running down her too thin pale cheek. Only her green eyes, the single trait they shared despite having two different fathers, were clear, alert. Don't forget to ice your hands. You won't be able to use them tomorrow if you don't. Selena gave her sister a half smile, which only made her face hurt more, and obeyed, transferring the peas from her throbbing face to the split, swollen skin of her knuckles. At least the swelling had gone down since the fight finished an hour ago. Maggie slowly crossed the room, and Selena tried not to wince at the labored breathing. The quiet clearing of her sister's throat. The latest lung infection had taken its toll, and the color was gone from her usually pink cheeks. You should go to the hospital, Maggie breathed, or let me clean you up. Selena ignored both suggestions and asked, How are you feeling? Maggie pulled the pile of cash towards her, eyes widening as she began counting wrinkled 20s. Fine. You do your homework? A wry, exasperated look. Yes, and tomorrow's. Good girl. Maggie studied her, those green eyes too alert, too aware. We've got the doctor tomorrow after school. What about it? Maggie finished counting the money and neatly set the stack into the small box with the EBT card. Mom won't be there. Neither would Maggie's father, whoever he was. Selena doubted even her mother knew. Selena's own father, she only knew what her mother had said during one of her rambling monologues while high. That her mother had met him through a friend at a party, nothing more, not even a name. Selena moved the frozen peas from her right hand to her left. No, she won't, but I will. Maggie scratched at an invisible fleck on the table. Auditions for the spring play are soon. You gonna try out? A little shrug. I want to ask the doctor if I can. So responsible, her sister. What musical is it this year? Carousel. Have we watched that one? A shake of the head, those curls bouncing in a beaming smile. Selena smiled back. But I assume we're gonna watch it tomorrow night? Friday night, movie night, courtesy of a DVD player she and the Leopards had taken off the back of a truck. In the library's extensive movies section. Maggie nodded. Broadway musicals, Maggie's not-so-secret dream and lifelong obsession. Selena had no idea where it had come from. They'd certainly never been able to afford theater tickets. But Maggie's school had taken plenty of field trips to Gotham City productions. Perhaps she'd picked it up on one of those outings. That undying love, undimming even when the cystic fibrosis battered her lungs so brutally that singing, standing on stage, and dancing were difficult. Perhaps a lung transplant might change that, but she was at the bottom of a long, long list. Even as Maggie's health plummeted with each passing month, she didn't move any higher, and the drugs that the doctors had hailed as breakthroughs that would add decades of life for some people with CF, Maggie hadn't responded to them. But Selena wasn't about to tell her sister any of that. She'd never make her feel like there were limits to what she could do. That Maggie was even willing to audition made Selena's chest unbearably tight. You should go to bed, Selena said to her sister, setting down the frozen peas. You should too, Maggie said tartly. Selena huffed a low laugh that made her aching body protest in agony. We'll go together. She winced as she stood and chucked the peas back in the freezer. She just turned around when frail arms wrapped carefully around her waist, as if Maggie knew that bruises now bloomed on her ribs. I love you, Selena, she said quietly. Selena kissed the top of Maggie's head through the riot of curls and rubbed her sister's back, even as it made her fingers bark in pain. Worth it, though. That pain as she held her sister. The fridge a steady hum around them. Worth it. I don't understand how our copay the last time was so much cheaper. It was an effort to keep her voice steady, to keep her hands from curling into fists on the counter of the hospital's checkout desk. The aging woman in pink floral scrubs barely glanced up from her computer. I can only tell you what the computer tells me. She pointed with a long purple nail to whatever was on the screen. And this says you owe $500 today. Selena clenched her jaw so hard it ached, glancing over her shoulder to where Maggie waited in one of the plastic chairs against the white wall, reading a book, but her eyes weren't darting over the page. Selena kept her voice down, even though she knew Maggie would just lean forward to eavesdrop. Last month, it was 100. That purple nail tapped against the screen. Dr. Tasker did tests today. Your insurance doesn't cover them. No one told me that. Even if they had, Maggie needed those tests. Yet the results they'd received. Selena shoved the thought from her mind, along with what the doctor had said moments ago. The woman finally looked up from her computer, long enough to take in Selena. The swelling had gone down on her face, the bruises concealed with some expert makeup and artful arranging of her curtain of dark hair. The woman's blue eyes narrowed. "Are you the parent or guardian?" Selena just said, "We can't pay that bill." "Then it's something to take up with your insurance company." "Yes, but Maggie would need more tests like the one she'd had today. The next one in 2 weeks. Third a month from now." Selena did the math and swallowed the tightness in her throat. "There's nothing the hospital can do?" The woman typed away, keys clacking. "It's an issue for your insurance company." "Our insurance company will say it's an issue for you." The clacking on the keys stopped. "Where's your mother?" The woman glanced around Selena as if she'd find her mother standing a few feet away. Selena was half tempted to tell the woman to take a stroll through an East End alley, since that was the only place their mother would be, dead or alive. Instead, she plucked up the insurance card that had been left on the counter and said flatly, "She's at work." The woman didn't seem convinced, but she said, "We'll send the bill to your house." Selena didn't bother replying as she turned and scooped up her sister's heavy backpack, slinging it over her shoulder. She motioned for Maggie to follow her to the elevator bay. "We don't have $500, Maggie murmured, while Selena punched the elevator button harder than was necessary. "Now, between the food and rent and today's tests, the money from the fight wouldn't stretch far enough." "Don't worry about it," Selena said, watching the elevator doors light up one by one. Floors. Maggie wrapped her arms around herself. Not good. The news had not been good. The crushing tunnel vision again crept up on Selena. Those $500 and those stupid tests. That bland-faced doctor saying there's no cure for CF, but let's try another route or two. She'd almost asked, before what? As Maggie continued to hold herself, her blunted, rounded fingertips, their shape another screw you from the disease, dug into her thin arms, hard enough to make Selena wince. Selena pried one of her sister's hands free and interlaced their fingers. Squeezing tightly, neither sister let go the entire trek home. The neighbors were really at each other's throats. Barely 5 minutes after Selena had turned on the movie, the shouting and screeching had begun filtering in through the wall behind them. Curled up on the sagging, stained couch that also served as Selena's bed, her sister tucked against one end of her feet in Selena's lap. Selena half listened to the drunken fight unfurling next door and the musical on the ancient TV in front of them. Carousel. The music was fine, even if everyone was a bit too judgy and smiley. And the dude was a total controlling loser douchebag. Still, Maggie's head swayed and bobbed along. The aroma of cheap mac and cheese clung to the air. Selena had offered to buy Maggie a real dinner out, but Maggie had wanted to just go home. "Tired," she said. She hadn't lost that grim-faced expression since the hospital, and there was enough of a nip in the air that Selena hadn't tried to convince her. Not that they had the money. After the doctor's not-so-sunny prognosis, what difference did $30 make? Selena eyed her flip phone sitting on the coffee table. She'd propped her feet up. Mika and the other leopards knew not to call on Fridays. Knew tonight was the only night Selena wouldn't show up, no matter the job or the threat. But if Mika called right then, saying Falcone was hosting another fight and it'd pay big, she'd take it. She'd take 3 fights in a row. Yet no. She had to be smart about it. If she was hurt badly, the hospital social workers would come sniffing. Ask where their mother was and likely recognize the tattoo inked down Selena's arms. Tattoos she kept covered year-round with long sleeves. Even with Maggie, she made sure to dress in the bathroom and never to roll up her sleeves too high while washing her hands. But in the ring, those tattoos were on full display for her opponents. "Look how many have fallen," they snarled to all who saw them. "You're next." The wall behind them thudded, rattled the two framed pictures. The bigger one, a photo of her and Maggie from 2 years ago, the frame stolen. The photo, a cheap printout off the school library printer. They'd been sitting on a bench in the park on a glorious fall day, the trees bright as jewels around them, and Maggie had asked a passing businesswoman to take the picture on her phone. The quality of the image wasn't great, but the light shining from Maggie's face was still undeniable. In the second photo, a photo of Selena 5 years ago, mid-air as she executed a perfect backflip on a balancing beam. One of many gymnastics competitions she'd participated in, and won. Her instructor at the Y had tried to convince her to keep going after those initial 3 years, claiming that she was remarkably gifted, but Maggie's illness had gotten worse. Their mom had just bailed, and the time and money it would take to train and compete, not an option. So Selena had stopped going to gymnastics class, had stopped picking up the coach's calls, even if she still used everything she learned in her fights. The crowds loved it too, perhaps more than the bullwhip. Their favorite, a back handspring into a backflip, right onto her opponent's shoulders, where gravity and a squeeze of her legs around the throat did the work in bringing a man to his knees. A string of curses shot through the apartment, and Maggie leaned forward to grab the remote off the table and punch up the volume. "This is the big number," her sister explained, her eyes fixed on the screen. "The most famous song in the musical." The controlling douchebag had indeed launched into a seemingly endless monologue. He's just found out that his wife is pregnant and he's having a total freakout. "I'm watching," Selena said, brows lifting. Maggie smiled, shaking her head. "You were listening to the neighbors." Guilty. Selena gave her sister a wince of apology and focused again on the musical. Musing and brooding and gloating about the son he'd have, utter macho nonsense. "They're really putting this on at your school?" Maggie hushed her with a waved hand. The song shifted, the jerk now mulling over what it'd be like with a daughter. More macho nonsense and misogynistic crap. Selena slid her attention over to Maggie as the music shifted, rising. Her sister's beautiful green eyes were wide and bright. "This is the part," she whispered. The music exploded, and her sister's lips moved, mouthing every word. Mouthing because those failing lungs couldn't hold enough air to make the sounds, and the latest infection in them had ripped away any chance of holding a note in key. Maggie silently sang on, not missing a word. Selena looked to the screen, to the crashing ocean and the man belting out every note. Every dream to shelter and clothe and keep food on the table for his child, to attain money in any way he could, whether by theft or making it honestly. His only alternative, die trying. And for a moment it seemed that even the neighbors quieted to hear it. The entire complex, all of East End. When Selena glanced back to her sister, Maggie was staring at her, eyes closed. And it was the understanding on her sister's face, the way Maggie's damp eyes flicked to the bruises on Selena's own. Selena made herself stay seated for another minute, 2, 5, 10. Maggie went back to watching the movie. The neighbors went back to screaming and cursing. Then Selena casually rose, gently setting Maggie's blanket-wrapped feet on the couch before padding for the bathroom. She wondered if her sister saw her scoop up her phone. Selena shut the bathroom door and ran the sink faucet on full blast. She managed to close the lid on the toilet at least before she slumped onto it and covered her face with both hands, breathing hard between her fingers. The room pushed in, and she couldn't get air down fast enough, deep enough. Her hand slid to her chest as if she'd somehow will her lungs to open up. Her lungs and Maggie's lungs, wrecked and failing. There are countless other desperate patients waiting for lung transplants, the doctor had said this afternoon. I would not count on it as an option. Unless you are rich enough to buy your way up the list. Or to buy yourself a pair on the black market. Selena took gulping mouthfuls of air, hands shaking so badly she lowered them to her knees, gripping tight. They were fighting for 20 years at best. At worst, the rate at which the disease has progressed and Maggie's resistance to the drugs are cause for concern, the doctor had gone on, speaking more to his flock of interns than to them. Maggie hadn't asked him if she could be in the musical. Her sister had known. She'd known that this thing that made her come alive with joy, that gave her whatever slim shred of hope. It didn't matter how many fights Selena fought for her. How many stores she looted with the leopards. The blood and the bruises, the cracked ribs, would not buy her sister a new set of lungs, or a cure for this disease, or a chance to stand on that school stage and belt her heart out. Sobs threatened, shuddering beneath each breath. Selena covered her face again as if she could hide it. The tears that rose up within her like a tidal wave that she pushed back and back and back. Hands trembling, she grabbed the phone off the narrow sink counter. Fingers shaking so wildly, she could barely text Mika. I need another fight. ASAP. Mika replied a few minutes later. If you need cash, I've got you covered. Tempting, but too many complications. She wouldn't be able to repay Mika. And though she trusted her alpha, this was the East End. Everybody needed cash. And Mika might be ruthless in getting it returned to her. Fights are fine. Then after a heartbeat, but thank you. Mika's response came instantly. Anything I should be concerned about? Not because she cared, but because if it was something that threatened the leopards, she needed to know. Just personal shit. That was weird. Whether the leopards knew her sister was sick, she wasn't sure. She had never told them, and Mika wasn't the type to ask. Mika replied, You healed enough from the last fight to do it? No. Yes. Selena blew out a breath, tears sinking back into her. Shutting off the faucet, she listened. The musical continued on, along with the neighbors fighting. She could steal the money, of course. Had done it in the past with the leopards. Even enjoyed the puzzle that some burglaries offered. How to break inside a place, how to ease past the guards or security systems, how to avoid leaving a trail. But to go it alone, she hadn't done that yet. Wouldn't risk jail, not with fighting as a relatively safer option. Mika only said, I'll ask Falcone. Selena flipped her phone shut and flushed the toilet. Mercifully, her hands had stopped shaking by the time she emerged into the living room, where her sister was still bundled on the couch. Maggie picked up the remote and paused the movie, looking Selena over with eyes that missed nothing. Not even the cell phone clenched in Selena's hand. Maggie asked quietly, Can't you just ask for the money? Selena didn't care to guess how Maggie had figured out she slid her phone into how Maggie had figured it out as she slid her phone into her back pocket. No. She and the leopards were often sent by Falcone to those in his debt, either to remind them of the money owed or to exact punishment when the final warning had been ignored. It was ugly and dirty, and over her dead body would she ever be in his debt. But no. Maggie opened her mouth again, green fire lighting her eyes. But a knock sounded on the door. They froze. Not good. At this hour. Another pounding knock. Police! And that is the end of chapter 1. Wow. Oh, I need a more comfortable chair, I swear. Yeah, pretty good so far. I enjoy that the first chapter took the time to really, just fully detail Selena's motivations for what's to come, because obviously she's going to be Catwoman at some point. And a lot of things that, showcase Catwoman don't really go into her backstory too much. Like, I've only seen a few movies with Catwoman, and they always just kind of start with her death and then being resurrected by cats or whatever. But this one actually has some personal stakes to it instead of just being a supernaturally gifted person that robs things. And I like that. I mean, the TV show Gotham has Selena as a child, but she's still just a child that steals things. There isn't too much to her character, I feel, except for, well, it's kind of like in this book actually, where she cares for Ivy, I guess. But yeah, pretty good. Kind of really sets the scene. If you made it this far, thank you for listening, I assume, to the full thing. And let me know what you think of, I don't know, Catwoman. If you think this is accurate to the comics or not. I mean, the comics are kind of a loose base to go on because there's so many different, universes and whatnot. But so far, so good. And yeah, stay tuned for the next chapter in the next episode. Please consider liking and subscribing. Leave a comment on your thoughts about the book and all that stuff. And yeah, have a great day, everyone. And I will see you later.